Norman asked me if I could talk about the future of tram and rail because it obviously very much relates to Norman's ideas for making sure that we increase densities close to railways and tram lines and not just willy-nilly. As was said, I was a public transport planner for many, many years, and I learned and experienced many things related to public transport in that time. Many mistakes. Because of my town planning background, I had a lot to do with trying to coordinate public transport and land use planning, and that was incredibly difficult. We were told before that climate change was something like number 1021, was it, on the list of things that people might consider. Usually I found when dealing with local councils, etc., that public transport was number 1022. They just had no idea at all. What I'm going to just go through for you is just some ideas, some much more concrete than others, for future tram and train lines around Adelaide. And I've had to do this on different maps because in all sorts of areas there are various different options, and you can mix and match those. Since retirement, I've been writing a history of Adelaide's public transport, which is with Wakefield Press now, hopefully to be published very shortly. If anyone wants to be notified when it's available, if you can put your name and email address on this list here sometime today, that would be great. Well, I'll be 123 in 2070, so I'm looking forward to that. One of the most significant things about our rail system, people are saying all the time, we should try to get more people to use the trains. And in public transport planning, we tried many times to feed more bus services into trains, only to have people screaming, "No, I like my bus that goes down King William Street. Don't take that away from me." And that's happened time and time again. Or people from Port Adelaide who used to have buses going along Rundle Street before it was Rundle Mall, they just loved their buses, and we tried to force more of those people on the Lefevre Peninsula to use the train by feeding buses in, and people absolutely hated that. This map here just tries to show you the size of the dots indicates the numbers of jobs in different parts of the city. This is in 1992, so it's a little bit old, but it would be similar now. The green circle is the area within 500 metres of Adelaide Railway Station. So you can see the trains do not serve the city very well. All the buses pass right through the centre of the city. Every bus that comes into the city, apart from one bus route, goes along King William Street, Curry Street or Grenfell Street. So there's a major intersection there where there used to be a decent public transport information centre, and the government, in its wisdom, decided to move that down to Adelaide Station, so it was as far as possible from the majority of public transport patrons, which was just absolutely ridiculous. So we need to do something about the rail system. Of course, the MATS plan, probably a lot of you would remember the MATS plan in 1968, but that recommended that we put the railways from the north to the south under the city along King William Street, with stations at Rundle Mall, Victoria Square and South Terrace. At that time, the Festival Theatre wasn't built, so there were some concerns about it causing rumbles in the Festival Theatre. And of course, at that time, there was no talk about keeping the Glenelg trams, and so the MATS plan railway was going to follow the Glenelg tram line down to Goodwood and down to Black Forest. So that wouldn't be any good anymore, but the concept is great. This is a possible alternative to that. Sorry, something sort of slipped there a little bit, but if you're going to not go along the tram line, it would be preferable if you go through the southwestern part of the city and link in with the railway at Keswick. Some people would say, you should build the tunnels using cut and cover, but that would cause huge disruption in the city. So I've assumed that you would do them by tunnelling, and of course you could use some second-hand tunnelling machines from the South Road tunnelling when that's finished. But if you do go through the southwestern part of the city, then the ideal sort of central point there would be a Whitmore Square. There is another possible option which people have talked about from time to time, and that is just forgetting about the port lines for the moment, but you could bring the line from Gawler in actually under North Adelaide. This would be a much longer tunnel, of course, but that could be a possibility. You might be able to have it somewhere near the famous Le Cornu's site there in O'Connell Street, and perhaps a station close to the current Children's Hospital. And then, of course, a station at Rundle Mall and Victoria Square and Whitmore Square. One of the options that the department was looking at a few years ago, this has been since I retired, was to take the underground east, sort of along North Terrace or close to that, and then around perhaps through Hindmarsh Square, and then across to Victoria Square, etc. When you leave here, some of you may not notice, but there's two buildings opposite that are at that have this funny angle through them. That angle between those two buildings was put there to allow for construction of the Adelaide's future underground railway, which you may not realise. So you can see where I've shown where the railway would come in under the health precinct. Well, that coincides with that location there. Now, in terms of future suburban railways, again, things seem to have slipped around as this has gone into the USB. We have the Adelaide to Gawler Railway. There are so many examples along the Gawler Railway of very poor relationships between land use and public transport. You know, who would have a railway next to an airport, which is basically vacant land, which doesn't feed anything at all into the railway? The Elizabeth Shopping Centre should have been built directly over or right next to Elizabeth Station. Instead of that, the Housing Trust got told, no, you need to have it close to Main North Road so that people in cars can see it. And that same story has repeated itself in various places. Where would you go in future with future railways to the north or to the northeast? Of course, we've got the famous Buckland Park, which is being developed now. That was first proposed when I was still working, and I wrote a scathing report about how poorly that area would be served by public transport. It would not fit in with the then government's strategic plan, which was to increase the percentage of people using public transport. That it would certainly not do that, because people who live at Buckland Park are going to work in all sorts of places, and you don't really know where to run public transport for them, so they'll end up buying cars. So that's just crazy. I don't really know what's happening about Two Wells, but if you did want to have a railway in the long term going out to Two Wells, etc., would you go via Salisbury, which would follow the existing standard gauge line via direct, or would you go up via Waterloo Corner, sort of between Waterloo Corner and St Kilda? And there is a proposal for a freight railway going that way, so maybe in the long term that could be a suburban railway. But whatever you do, it's going to be not a very good route for a railway, because there's so much vacant land between, say, Dry Creek and Two Wells. Then there's the Barossa. Lots of people dream about reopening the Barossa line, which would be nice when I put my dreamer's hat on. If I put my commuter planning hat on, there's two things. One is if you did run a decent commuter rail service to the Barossa Valley, you're certainly going to encourage a lot more urban development there, and do people really want more urban development in the Barossa Valley? If you wanted a fast commuter service, you probably wouldn't follow the existing railway line, because that's quite a curvy sort of line. You'd possibly go straight from just north of Gawler via Roseworthy across to Nunda, so that would be much shorter. or as I've said there, violin dot. Down to the south, we have the existing railway which went to as far as Noarlunga Centre by 1976, and then on to Seaford in 2014 and electrified. There was land reserved. I was working with the guy who planned that Seaford line, and he planned the land for the extension of that further south from Seaford. And at the time he said, and this was back in the 1990s, at the time he said, you must make sure that this line can eventually possibly go to Victor Harbour, because the best way to get across the escarpment at Selix or at Willunga is definitely not to go through Willunga, but probably is to go up via Selix Hill. Now, I think the time is virtually now that the line should be extended to Aldinga, because there's huge amounts of housing there. The commuter car park at the Seaford station is absolutely chock-a-block. But I got the impression from people in the department a few years ago that there was some work going on in planning a route for that line, and then I tried to find out some more recently. I think many of you might have seen in the paper there was a development approved for a huge parcel of land just to the west of the old Aldinga township. Well, if that's developed, that will block off any possibility of the railway going on the western side of South Road. And to me, the western side of South Road, where the people live, is the obvious place to put a railway. I sent an email to the local member to see if he knew anything, and he said, there are no plans for extending the Seaford line. So do you not bother doing any planning until someone says, oh, we need a railway to Aldinga in 30 years' time, and then have to go back and buy 300 houses so you can put the railway through? So there's just really nothing happening about that at the present time. And then, as I said, maybe the land should be reserved so that line could eventually go to Victor Harbour, because that would be a much shorter line than the one via Strathalbyn. Norman mentioned the name McLaren Vale a few times. Again, I just question that, in that people don't seem to want more urban development in McLaren Vale and Willunga, and as sure as eggs, if you do run the railway to those towns, you will get a lot more urban development there. Now, coming on to trams for a minute. Many, mainly European cities, but also American cities, Chinese cities, etc., are actually reintroducing trams at the moment, modern trams that look something like this. This is one in Bordeaux. My wife and I were there about 4 or 5 years ago. It's an absolutely fabulous system. It's also designed so that the trams can run through the city without having overhead wires. So they run in the suburbs with overhead wires. And they can fit into all sorts of places that normal trains cannot do. And my personal view is that Adelaide is of such a size that trams like this would be better serving a lot of the inner suburban area than trains. And in fact, going back to history, in the 1920s, the general manager of the MTT, Sir William Goodman, and the Commissioner of South Australian Railways, William Webb, both agreed that the Municipal Tramways Trust should take over all the suburban railways, and they said, we'll start with the Glenelg line. And that's what happened. They bought enough Glenelg trams to run the Glenelg line and to replace the North Terrace to Glenelg line as well, which Norman mentioned before. They bought 30 of them. They've never had to use all those trams, and now most of them are in museums in various parts of Australia. But that whole plan fell through because of the Great Depression, and also William Webb, I think, virtually got kicked out of South Australia because he liked to spend lots of money. What I would preferably do, provided the Lefevre Peninsula doesn't get flooded, is to convert the Port the Port Adelaide Outer Harbour and Grange lines to light rail, which means you can then run them further into the city along North Terrace and possibly down King William Street. But you can also change the route in Port Adelaide, because the existing railway has actually bypassed the centre of Port Adelaide since it was diverted in 1916. The steam trains used to go along St Vincent Street. It was changed, and it's been awful since. There's been a very minimal train service into the old Port Dock station. A few years ago, Labor decided we must reintroduce trains to the Port Dock station, which to me was a stupid idea, because all that would have done would be to split the Outer Harbour service, which then makes it more difficult to run a decent service through to on the main line. But also it didn't help people who lived north of Port Adelaide to get into the centre of the port. Whereas if you have light rail going along Commercial Road and St Vincent Street and over the Jervois Bridge, and trams used to do that until 1935, then you're not providing Port Adelaide with a decent rail service. The current entertainment centre tramline, which goes down Port Road as far as the entertainment centre, that was actually built as the forerunner of having light rail down to Port Adelaide. And because there didn't seem to be any likelihood of that happening for a while, the department suggested to the minister that they develop a park and ride place at the entertainment centre so people could catch the tram from there, and then you've got a reason for having a tram line. But unfortunately, a study carried out by the University of Adelaide found that the majority of people that parked at the entertainment centre used to use public transport from further out in the suburbs and used to drive or walk to their train or bus locally. Now they drive all the way to the entertainment centre. Therefore, the total amount of car driving actually went up as a result of putting this park and ride facility at the entertainment centre. If, as I think will probably happen, the government will probably just race ahead and convert the Port Adelaide lines just to an ordinary electric train, which won't improve anything for anyone, apart from giving them a nice, bright, shiny new electric train service. If they do that, the tram line from the city to the entertainment centre, what's it for? Especially if the current government moves everything from the entertainment centre to next to the River Trams, there'll be no reason for anyone to catch a tram to the no longer existing entertainment centre. That map just shows the pink line was until everything shifted. The pink line would be the tram route through the centre of Port Adelaide, and the dotted line is the existing railway. Well, that's just a tram at the Black Diamond Corner in the centre of Port Adelaide in about 1930. There is another option for the northwest with trams, and that's to, rather than converting the Grange line to a tram line, would be to build the line to West Lakes, which has long been proposed, and West Lakes Boulevard was actually designed to carry a train line at some stage in the future. There are all sorts of possibilities in the city for light rail. These are just some. Both major political parties have talked about the possibility of a line to O'Connell Street, North Adelaide, so you can see that there. They've both talked about ideas for a city loop for the trams. My idea is a little bit different from both of those. Mine actually ties in with the Glenelg line in Victoria Square, so people could transfer easily in the southern part of Victoria Square onto the city loop if they wish to do so. That's O'Connell Street with trams in about 1910. So you can see there are so many people that say, oh, we can't possibly reintroduce trams, there's just not room on our roads for them. Well, look at O'Connell Street. There was another proposal developed, again this is under the previous government, in the latter days of, many of you might remember the name Adelaide, which was the Labor government's proposals for reintroducing trams on about 5 or 6 different suburban tram lines. And someone in the department came up with the idea of, rather than having the trams from Port Adelaide come in along the entertainment centre line, would be to come in along the railway line to just west of North Adelaide and then follow War Memorial Drive right around to just immediately south of Adelaide Oval. I'm not too sure how they'd get past the very narrow bit at the southern end of Adelaide Oval between there and the footbridge, but that was a proposal which is always possible, but that tram line would be going through a lot more of the parklands, of course. Right, we've been talking in the department and many ideas come up in the department, but you never hear them as members of the public because they're always top secret. The chief engineer of the State Transport Authority, it was at the time, the late Ron Sween, he suggested that the trams from Port Adelaide should come off the railway line at Bowden and come up through North Adelaide along Molesworth Street and Tint Street, and they could possibly go underneath Wellington Square so you don't damage Wellington Square, or they could do what a lot of European tram lines do, they could go across Wellington Square with the tracks in nice green grass, which happens in many cities now. And then they would come into the city via O'Connell Street and along King William Road. That idea would then provide the residents of North Adelaide with a tram line into the city, but you're still faced with the prospect of what happens about the future of the entertainment centre tram line. That plan also shows, I think it was Labor's proposal for a city loop, which would go down Halifax Street and Sturt Street. Of course, some of that would not be needed around Whitmore Square if you have an underground railway station at Whitmore Square. The Adelaide proposals included a tram line to Blair Athol along Prospect Road. Many people have said, you couldn't possibly run trams along Prospect Road, it's too narrow, and certainly the council has done its best to traffic calm Prospect Road, so they would have to do some pretty major work to make trams work along there. That's Prospect Road with the tram line as it was. The photo would have been taken about 1957. I used to catch trams along Prospect Road for a while, but you can see the amount of space, but of course these days there's so much landscaping and everything else that's happened since that time. To the south, the Adelaide project proposed a tram line along Unley Road, and that had similar issues, and this map just shows the tram line to Mitcham along Unley Road, it shows the existing train line to Belair, and it shows the existing Glenelg tram line. You can see how circuitous the train line from Belair is. In fact, if you live at Belair, you have to go away from Adelaide for a start if you wanted to go towards Adelaide, and then you get to the southern edge of the city and you've got to go right around the outside of the city to come into North Terrace. One option for the North Adelaide tram line would be to run it down to Wavingham Station, which would mean that people who wanted to come into North Adelaide from the outer northern suburbs could transfer onto the tram to do that. Now, Unley Road, it's a bit like Prospect Road. So many people seem to have said, well, you couldn't possibly run trams along Unley Road. Well, that's what trams along Unley Road used to look like in about 1957. What I would do, if I was king, is to convert the Belair railway line to a tram and run it from Belair to Goodwood and then come up the Glenelg tram line, which would then bring people into the central part of the city without having to go right around the outside of it. Trams could easily accommodate the patronage on the Belair line, very easily. So that's just another possibility. Of course, you'd probably have to forget that if the Mount Barker Hills dwellers managed to get their rocket-powered trains down through Belair and Blackwood. There's another couple of ideas, one of which wasn't talked about with Adelaide. I've shown the tram line along Henley Beach Road with a branch to the airport. That's what was proposed by Adelaide, although they dropped the line beyond the airport to Grange. They dropped that, so they only had a line to the airport. I should mention that the airport is pretty well served by buses. Lots of people say, we must have trams to the airport, but when you think about where do most of the people who catch planes come from, they don't come from the city, they come from all over Adelaide. It's very difficult to get, like if you live at Brighton, you're going to catch a train into the city and then catch a tram to the airport. No, you're going to drive straight to Adelaide Airport. So I've always questioned whether a tram line to Adelaide Airport would actually work well or not. The other thing I wanted to show on this plan, and this sort of came to me following talking with Norman, was you could make use of the old North Terrace to Glenelg Railway as a tram line, and which was proposed in 1929, and then run it down Marion Road, which is a much wider road than Unley Road and Prospect Road, and run it down to Marion Shopping Centre, which is, Marion Shopping Centre is yet another case of a big centre being placed so near and so far from a railway. So, and that, if you had a tram line doing that, I'm sure it would be extremely well patronised. There is a bus route that does quite a lot of that now. Oh, that's just showing Henley Beach Road with a tram line. And Henley Beach Road is wider than either Prospect Road or Unley Road, and probably much more suited to becoming a future tram line. One alternative to a tram line down the old Glenelg Rail route is to have an O-Bahn or a busway down that route as far as Marion Road, and then run the buses from some of the southwestern suburbs into the centre of the city. And you could actually through-link those buses, just as happens now, to the O-Bahn in the northeast. That's just showing the existing O-Bahn out to the northeast, and a tram line along the parade. Now, our Premier wouldn't like me promoting that, but the parade is a very wide road with a couple of exceptions. It was quite suitable for trams up until 1957, and what I would do in the long term is to run it out along the parade and then up St Bernard's Road, so it would link in with the O-Bahn at Paradise Interchange, and that would help with some cross-suburban travel, because many people complain about the lack of cross-suburban facilities in Adelaide. I keep hearing whispers. The O-Bahn was built starting in 1986 to last 30 years. Well, it's now 35 years. I personally think it's probably still perfectly safe, but I don't know when the government may have to do something about replacing it. So all I'm suggesting is that if and when it has to be replaced, whether they just put new concrete down or something else, one alternative option is to run a tram out there, which was the proposal up till 1979 when the government changed. And so that's another option for the northeast. That's the parade with trams. I was actually horrified when one of the last things as part of that Adelaide project was to take the Norwood Parade proposed tram line and turn it off before you got to the shopping centre at Osmond Terrace, and then go up McGill Road. Well, the main reason why the Norwood Shopping Centre is there is that in 1878 horse trams started running through the centre of Norwood, and then the electric trams did the same. So if we did the stupid thing of taking the trams to the eastern suburbs out of the Norwood Parade, that would be just ridiculous. There are, as I mentioned before, there are plenty of places in the world where trams run under trees, and where there are now trams that don't have to use the overhead. I think some of the engineers were concerned about getting trams through the intersection of the Parade and Portrush Road. Well, that's one of the old Glenelg trams, which the excess Glenelg trams were often used on the line out to Kensington Gardens. They used to go through there, and you can see how happily that tram was making it across that intersection. Just as a final thing for you to think about, I've got no solutions for what should happen from Mount Barker. I can remember making a comment at the time when Mount Barker was going to be expanded. What's happening about all the services? You know, who's going to pay for the improved public transport, etc.? No answer. The railway distance from Mount Barker to the city is 55 kilometres. The road distance by the express bus is 33 kilometres. Now, I did mention before, this is my last slide, but if anyone is interested in possibly buying a copy of my book, if you could put your name on there, well, that would be great. So thank you very much.